Beneath the veil of clouds, far from crowded cities and over-photographed landmarks, lie places so surreal, so untouched by time, that they seem drawn from the pages of myth rather than maps. These are the Earth's most unreal places, hidden ridgelines cloaked in mist, ancient peaks carved with sacred history, and forgotten valleys where nature still breathes in its wildest form. In this journey, we travel beyond the ordinary to explore remote summits draped in orchids, desert-edge mountains that cradle snowfields, and forested canyons where waterfalls plunge from cliffs sculpted over millennia. Each location is a living tapestry of geology, biodiversity, and cultural legacy, many unknown even to seasoned travelers. From the karst labyrinths of Guangxi to the wind-lashed spurs of the Tibetan Plateau, from the highland caves of Shaanxi to the sacred ridges of Yunnan, this odyssey unveils Earth's most mysterious wonders, one breathtaking mountain at a time. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Hidden deep within the southern stretches of Yunnan province, Mount Jinfo, rises quietly over the storied banks of the Red River Valley, a land so steeped in ecological and cultural richness that it remains one of China's most unsung natural wonders. Unlike the theatrical crags of Zhangjiajie or the tourist-trodden steppes of Huangshan, Mount Jinfeng's allure is one of solemn, mysterious beauty. The mountain doesn't shout its presence, it breathes it into the air, whispering through the forests that hug its flanks, and lingering in the sacred customs of the minority peoples who have lived under its shadow for centuries. This remote peak forms part of the broader Ailao mountain range, a spine of green and stone that divides the tropic-humid lands of southern Yunnan from the high-altitude river valleys to the west. The mountain's geographical isolation has served as both a sanctuary and a fortress. As a sanctuary, it shelters some of China's richest biodiversity, with lush subtropical forests cloaking its slopes in tier upon tier of emerald. The terrain ranges from dense bamboo groves to mossy oak forests and stretches of ancient camphor trees. These forests are alive with the murmurs of rare birds and the subtle rustle of small mammals that evade easy classification. Many species here are endemic, found nowhere else on Earth, hidden away by nature's own design. As a fortress, Mount Jinfeng has shielded cultural traditions that time and politics have often eroded elsewhere. The region is home to various minority ethnic groups, including the Han and Yi peoples, whose relationship to the land is intimate and profound. Their terraced agriculture, especially the magnificent rice terraces that cascade down valleys like living sculpture, reflects an ecological symbiosis rarely seen in modern landscapes. These terraces, carefully carved over generations into the surrounding foothills of Jinping, shimmer with water through the seasons, catching the sky and reflecting it in kaleidoscopic hues during planting time. Local spiritual life is woven into the terrain. Small shrines, often made of stone and wood and hidden deep within the mountain trails, speak to centuries of animistic worship. Sacred trees are wrapped in red ribbons, sacred springs bubble quietly with offerings of rice wine and incense ash. These are places where rituals are still observed, not for tourists, but for ancestors and forest spirits. Despite its biological richness and cultural depth, Mount Jinping remains relatively unknown. The roads that lead here are winding and often weather-beaten, passing through market towns where buffalo roam the same streets as mopeds. Few domestic tourists, and even fewer international ones, make their way this far south, leaving the mountain in a kind of temporal pocket, a fragment of old China preserved in the folds of steep ridges and mist. At higher elevations, the forest becomes broken by alpine meadows where wildflowers bloom in the spring in bursts of yellow, violet, and white. In winter, the peak may even catch snowfall, an event both beautiful and precarious for the local farmers who depend on seasonal cycles. Rainfall is frequent and often torrential, with monsoonal storms surging across the slopes from the south, drenching the forest in hours-long deluges that leave the land reborn, glittering in mist. The Red River, known locally as the Yuanjiang, slices through the valley below with a power both destructive and life-giving. It is the artery that feeds this region, and in turn, the mountain is its watchtower. From Jinping's higher vantage points, one can witness the full breadth of the river's meandering journey, its muddy channels carving through dense green, fading into haze at the distant Vietnamese border. There is, too, an unspoken reverence for the mountain among locals, a recognition that they live not above, but within the landscape. For many of the elders, the mountain is a living being, a guardian spirit, and a judge. Traditional songs speak of its moods, how it smiles through blossoms in the spring and growls when clouds coil around its crown. Children are taught not to take from the forest without asking, and not to speak loudly on certain ridgelines known to be the abode of ancestors' souls. Climbers who have attempted its higher ridges describe narrow trails lined with flowering rhododendrons and vines thick enough to require machetes. There are no formal paths, no rangers with maps, and no warning signs in multiple languages. Instead, one must rely on local guides, often barefoot men and women who know the jungle's rhythm better than any satellite image ever could. They can read the moss on the trees, the nesting habits of birds, the call of distant monkeys, all signs of direction, of passage, of invitation or caution. In a world that increasingly digitizes, flattens, and commodifies nature, Mount Jinping remains stubbornly resistant. Its wildness is not just physical, it is cultural, linguistic, emotional. The mountain demands patience, humility, and attention. It offers no guarantees and no easy revelations. But for those who listen, who tread softly through the misted underbrush and drink tea with old women who recall the revolutions and famines and festivals of long ago, Mount Jinping reveals a deeper kind of truth, one that speaks not just to the unreal beauty of the earth, but to its memory, and to the many lives that pulse quietly under the green canopy of forgotten ridges. Veering far from the well-trodden tourist paths that lead to the better-known faces of Baima Snow Mountain, the Mount Baimang South Ridge, often simply called the southern flank of Baimang or Baimangnaling, is a realm that time seems reluctant to touch. Here, the peaks rise with an austere, silent power, towering over glacial valleys and alpine forests in a dance of altitude and shadow. The South Ridge is a place of raw, surreal beauty, drenched in silence and painted in the palettes of ice, wind, and pine. Baima Snow Mountain itself stands among Yunnan's mightiest giants, but while the northern face has seen increased visibility due to ecological conservation efforts and its proximity to Shangri-La and Daqing County, the southern ridge lies wrapped in mystery. It is less accessible, less documented, and far more difficult to navigate. For this reason alone, it remains a stronghold for some of China's rarest wildlife, including the elusive and endangered Yunnan snub-nosed monkey, one of the few primates adapted to cold, high-altitude forests. The elevation here dances between 3,000 and nearly 5,500 meters, giving rise to vertical ecological zones that seem to compress whole worlds into narrow bands of elevation. At the base of the South Ridge, moss-covered rhododendron forests emerge, dripping with dew and haunted by the occasional call of rare pheasants. As one climbs, the landscape changes dramatically. Fir and spruce dominate the upper middle elevations, standing tall and needle-thin like cathedral spires, their dark silhouettes framed against mist or moonlight. But it is the snowfields and craggy, wind-blasted rock outcrops at higher elevations that give the South Ridge its most haunting and unreal character. These snowfields are not merely patches of seasonal frost. They are lingering relics of ancient glacier, seasonally replenished but eternal in spirit. The snow here, unlike in most temperate zones, is dry, powdery, and crackles underfoot with a sharpness that recalls the thinness of the surrounding air. Very few travelers venture into this terrain. There are no wooden boardwalks, no railings, and no viewing platforms. You are more likely to encounter the deep print of a Himalayan black bear in the snow than another human footprint. Even among seasoned mountaineers, the South Ridge is seen as intimidating, not because of technical climbing challenges per se, but because of its sheer remoteness, fickle weather, and almost complete absence of emergency support. This makes the region ideal for researchers and conservationists seeking to study isolated ecosystems. And indeed, several field studies conducted quietly over the past decades have revealed startling ecological treasures. For instance, botanists have catalogued incredibly rare alpine flora, some species so unique that they remain unnamed or unclassified in global databases. Delicate orchids, ghostly white fungi, and endemic medicinal herbs thrive in the microclimates found in wind-protected rock crevices and around glacial runoff streams. There is a sense that nature here has continued to evolve without interference, adjusting to eons of change without human reshaping. The indigenous Tibetan communities living on the peripheries of this ridge view the South Ridge with a kind of spiritual deference. Known as the White Horse Mountain, Baimang is not merely an obstacle or landmark, it is a sacred protector. Local lore says that the snow falling on the southern ridge comes not from clouds, but from the breath of a great celestial horse that guards the world from evil spirits. Pilgrims, though few, occasionally make treks to high-altitude rock cairns to leave offerings, small prayer flags, coins, yak butter lamps. These rituals are quiet, unobtrusive, woven into the rhythm of everyday life and seasonal migration. Climatically, The South Ridge experiences some of the most complex weather patterns in Yunnan. The monsoon winds from the Indian Ocean slam into the Himalayas here, releasing torrential rains in summer and heavy snowfall in winter. During certain seasons, thick clouds roll in and become trapped in the deep valleys and cirques, creating a phenomenon known locally as Sea of Mist. In these moments, the landscape disappears into abstraction. Only the jagged outlines of the peaks remain visible, floating like islands in a milky void. It is as if the world has been temporarily rewritten. For wildlife, this mosaic of habitats provides vital refuge. In addition to the snub-nosed monkey, the South Ridge is home to musk deer, clouded leopards, red pandas, and an astonishing variety of highland birds. Unlike their counterparts in more accessible parts of the mountain, these animals have adapted to an environment with almost no human presence. They move with fluid confidence across snow-laced ridges, hidden by camouflage and steep terrain. Researchers have described this region as a living ark, one of the last places where highland species can thrive without being hemmed in by development. The soundscape of the South Ridge is equally unforgettable. There is a wind here that speaks. It comes barreling through passes, echoing off ice walls and pine branches, at times shrieking like a spirit, at others whispering like a lullaby. In early mornings, the only other sounds might be the crunch of snow beneath boots, the sudden crack of ice shifting on distant cliffs, or the plaintive cry of a bird slicing the air. It is an experience that rewires your perception of silence, not as emptiness, but as fullness beyond language. Access to this part of the mountain is, by necessity, a negotiation with wilderness. Trails are narrow and barely visible, often following old yak migration routes or hunter paths carved into the mountain by generations of locals. These trails skirt glacial meltwater streams and ascend through avalanche-prone corridors that demand respect and local guidance. There are no signposts, no GPS-marked routes. To navigate here is to step into a different way of knowing, a blend of instinct, tradition, and environmental sensitivity. The South Ridge of Mount Baimang is not a destination for casual travel, and that is precisely its gift. It has been spared the fate of many spectacular natural places that, once discovered, are transformed by commerce and overexposure. Instead, this side of the mountain remains a living testament to the Earth's capacity for solitude, for mystery, and for endurance. It is a place where snow falls not just as weather, but as memory, layers of frozen time that hold within them the tracks of animals, the whispers of mountain gods, and the breath of wind that has blown untouched across the roof of the world for centuries. Shrouded in perennial mist and framed by a tapestry of emerald-green bamboo groves, Mount Huangmaoshan, in Guangdong is a mountain that exudes quiet enchantment. It rises not with dramatic cliffs or jagged snowfields, but with a kind of softness, its slopes swelling gently beneath the weight of cloud, the scent of tea leaves, and the ever-present hum of subtropical life. Nestled in a region better known for its bustling coastal cities and economic vigor, Huangmao feels like a relic of older, quieter times, where the rhythms of nature still dictate the cadence of human life. Located in the northeastern reaches of Guangdong, near the borders with Jiangxi and Fujian, Mount Huangmao belongs to a lesser-known chain of medium-elevation mountains that weave through the province like the curved spines of sleeping dragons. It's not the tallest or most rugged peak in the region, but it is among the most ecologically and culturally significant. Rising to just under 1,500 meters, Huangmaoshan captures the perfect balance of height and climate to nurture one of the most unique ecological zones in southern China, the misty, evergreen montane forests. What makes Mount Huangmao particularly unreal is its fusion of the wild and the cultivated. As one ascends the lower slopes, one passes through villages where life revolves around tea, ancient, time-honored tea, grown in small terrace plots carved into the hillsides like green amphitheaters. The tea here is not the mass-produced fare of industrial plantations, but hand-picked leaves from heirloom bushes, many of which have been tended by the same families for generations. Morning fog wraps around the tea terraces like silk, infusing the leaves with a cool humidity that enhances their fragrance and subtly sweetens their flavor. The result is a delicate, floral tea that is prized among connoisseurs yet rarely exported beyond the province. Above the tea gardens, bamboo forests take over with overwhelming presence. These are not the carefully trimmed ornamental groves seen in urban parks, but wild and untamed forests where giant stalks sway and knock against each other in the wind like hollow drums. The bamboo here can reach astonishing heights, some towering over 30 meters, their canopies forming green tunnels through which only scattered shafts of sunlight pierce. The forest floor is a soft carpet of fallen leaves and moss, dotted occasionally by the ivory curve of a hidden mushroom or the sudden flit of a mountain squirrel. The air on Mount Huangmao is thick with the scents of earth, leaf, and water. It smells of chlorophyll, of decaying wood, of blossoms that never bloom in the lowlands. During the rainy season, which spans much of the year, waterfalls spring spontaneously from the hillsides, tumbling down stone walls slick with moss and lichen. These are not massive cascades but gentle, veiled streams that seem to whisper rather than roar. In drier months, the mists still linger, fed by subtropical humidity and the mountain's unique geography. At dawn and dusk, the peak is often entirely swallowed by fog, making the forest seem like a dreamscape where trees fade into nothingness just a few meters ahead. Biodiversity flourishes in this soft, green world. Huangmao is home to a surprising array of flora and fauna, many of which are endemic to southern China. Birdsong echoes constantly through the canopy, laughing thrushes, silver pheasants, and even rare species like the white-necklaced partridge. Hidden within the underbrush are pangolins, civet cats, and masked palm civets, all increasingly rare due to habitat loss elsewhere. Botanists have recorded dozens of orchid species here, some of which bloom only once every few years and only under specific light and temperature conditions. In cultural terms, Mount Huangmao is just as rich. The area is dotted with small temples and ancestral shrines, many of them built directly into the mountainside or nestled among ancient camphor trees. These sites are not ostentatious, they are often little more than stone altars or pavilions, with faded red ribbons and incense sticks left behind by local villagers. Here, the divine is not separated from the natural. It inhabits the wind, the stone, the rain. Local beliefs, blending Taoist, Buddhist, and indigenous traditions, treat the mountain as a living being with moods and desires. A sudden landslide is not just a geological event but a sign of displeasure. An abundant tea harvest is seen as the mountain's blessing. There is one particular legend that lingers around Huangmao's summit, told by generations of tea farmers, that at midnight during the spring equinox, the mountain opens a mist gate to another world. Those who wander into the bamboo forest at that hour may disappear, returning hours, or even days, later, unable to remember where they had been. Some say they were tested by forest spirits. Others claim they saw visions of the ancestors. Whether myth or metaphor, it speaks to the profound connection between people and place here, a relationship that is not scientific but sacred. Hiking on Mount Huangmao is an act of devotion rather than recreation. Trails are narrow, often muddy, and marked by stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footfall. Wooden signs, handwritten in brush script, point the way to forgotten shrines, mountain springs, and secluded tea groves. The silence is almost total, broken only by wind in the bamboo or the occasional rustle of unseen animals. At the summit, there is no dramatic lookout or flashy viewing platform, only a small pagoda, weathered by time and often shrouded in clouds. From here, on a rare clear day, you can see the endless undulations of Guangdong's hills stretching out like waves of green velvet, with tiny villages blinking in and out of view through the mist. Mount Huangmao is not a destination to be done in a day, and certainly not one that submits easily to drone footage or influencer selfies. It demands something quieter, deeper, time, presence, and an openness to enchantment. It is unreal not because it defies nature, but because it embodies nature at its most subtle and immersive. It doesn't overwhelm you with grandeur. It absorbs you into a world of leaf, fog, and root. And in doing so, it reminds you of something easily forgotten in modern life, that the sacred is not always distant or dramatic. Sometimes, it is simply the sound of rain on bamboo, or the taste of spring-picked tea under a sky that no longer knows the sun. Far from the neon glow of modern Lebanon or the sweeping plains of central Shaanxi lies the shadowed form of Mount Qiyunshan, a solemn, crag-ridged mountain that breathes with the deep memory of China's ancient soul. Where many peaks boast of sheer height or biodiversity, Qiyunshan asserts itself in silence and stone. Its slopes are not covered in lush greenery, nor capped by eternal snow. Instead, they are carved by time, by monks, by warriors, and by the hands of nameless wanderers who sought something greater than the world below. The result is a rugged citadel of caves, temples, and wind-scoured ridgelines that feel closer to the realm of legend than geography. Mount Qiyunshan sits in the northern reaches of Shaanxi province, part of the transitional band where the forested Qiyunshan Mountains give way to the Lurs Hills of the north. Its position is unique, geographically isolated enough to have served as a hermitage through countless dynasties, yet close enough to ancient trade and pilgrimage routes that its presence shaped the spiritual and strategic histories of the region. From its base to its summit, Qiyunshan carries the weight of multiple centuries in every cliff and crevice. The very name Qiyunshan evokes mystery. Though scholars debate its etymology, local tradition links it to a legendary sage who, thousands of years ago, withdrew to the mountain to seek immortality. Some say the name refers to a forgotten general who built his final fortress into its walls. Others whisper that Qiyunshan comes from a pre-Qin word meaning deep echo, a reference to the strange acoustic phenomena that occur within its cave systems, where whispered words can travel impossible distances. The caves themselves are perhaps Mount Qiyunshan's most astonishing feature. Hewn directly into the limestone and sandstone flanks of the mountain, these chambers vary wildly in form and function. Some are simple meditation cells, no larger than a closet, just enough for a single monk to sit in zazen facing a carved Buddha etched into the wall. Others are sprawling temple complexes with stone steps leading to hidden grottos, frescoes of ancient bodhisattvas flaking with age, and soot-blackened ceilings from centuries of candle smoke. Many of these caves were carved during the Tang and Song dynasties, though some inscriptions suggest earlier use, possibly even as far back as the Han. Over time, Qiyunshan became a sanctuary for those fleeing war, persecution, or simply the chaos of worldly life. Daoist recluses, Chan Buddhist monks, outlaw poets, defeated generals, each left their trace in the mountain's silent halls. Some caves contain libraries of hand-copied sutras sealed in urns. Others are filled with broken statues, their heads removed during iconoclastic purges but their auras somehow intact. One particularly famed cave, known locally as the Cavern of Nine Breaths, is said to have a natural air shaft system that causes the wind to pulse in rhythmic exhalations, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. Monks once trained here in breath-holding and meditation, believing that the mountain's rhythm could help them attain longer states of stillness and even lengthen their lifespan. Visitors today still report an eerie, bodily sensation in the cave, an involuntary synchronization of their own breathing to the slow, ghostly gusts that drift through the chamber. Ascending Qiyunshan is an act of physical devotion. The trails are steep and poorly maintained, often little more than chains bolted into rock faces or crumbling stone staircases that twist dizzyingly up the sheer cliffs. Vegetation clings desperately to the terrain. Pines grow at impossible angles, their roots sunk deep into cracks. Hardy shrubs blossom in crevices where soil is almost non-existent. At higher altitudes, fog rolls in without warning, reducing visibility to a few meters and transforming the already dramatic landscape into a shifting world of shadows and silhouettes. There are legends of entire sects of monks who once inhabited the upper reaches of the mountain, living in silence, surviving on pine nuts and mountain spring water, and vanishing when imperial troops came to collect taxes or conscripts. Their invisible monastery, as the villagers call it, has never been officially documented, but rumors persist of cave systems beyond the known trail network, entrances concealed behind false stone walls or covered in decades of moss. Occasionally, a shepherd or a lost hiker reports strange chants echoing from unseen hollows, or the distant clang of a bell in windless air. Mount Qiyunshan's summit offers no traditional panoramic glory. More often than not, it is wreathed in cloud, and the landscape beyond is barely visible. But this opacity feels intentional, as if the mountain is telling you that vision is not the only form of insight. Instead of sweeping views, what one gets at the summit is silence. Profound, enveloping silence that presses on the skin like velvet and echoes within the chest. It is a silence not of absence, but of presence. Of something watching, something ancient and dignified, content in its solitude. The local communities at the mountain's foot revere Qiyunshan as both protector and judge. Seasonal rituals involve offerings at cave altars, fruits, paper talismans, and incense lit at dawn. No construction is permitted within a certain radius of the mountain without a priest's blessing, and even today, before villagers dig new wells or build new paths, they seek signs from the mountain in dreams or consult with elders who can interpret cloud shapes and animal behavior. In the winter months, snow clings to the upper caves, and icicles hang from the cliff mouths like frozen teeth. Pilgrims still come during this season, believing that the spiritual veil is thinnest in the cold. Wrapped in wool and carrying firewood on their backs, they ascend the perilous paths to pray in silence, to ask for forgiveness, clarity, or strength. They leave behind pieces of red cloth, tied to tree branches or door handles, as if marking their passage into and out of a place that straddles the mortal and the sacred. Mount Laowari is not a spectacle. It is a temple built not of bricks but of mountain itself. A fossilized whisper from China's ancient past. A place that keeps its secrets not through concealment, but through sheer gravity of presence. To walk its ridges and descend into its stone bellies is to enter a dialogue not with history, but with eternity, a conversation written in wind, carved in stone, and echoed in every quiet heartbeat that dares to listen. There is a silence that hangs over Mount Changbai's western crater rim, a silence so profound and uninterrupted it feels as if even time pauses to listen. This rarely glimpsed side of one of China's most sacred and dramatic volcanoes is remote, haunting, and undeniably unreal. While the northern and southern flanks of Mount Changbai, also known as Changbaishan or Ever White Mountain, are increasingly frequented by tourists drawn to the crystalline majesty of Heavenly Lake, the western rim remains almost untouched, wild, wind-scoured, and treacherously beautiful. It is the unspoken face of the volcano, the one that chooses not to be seen. Straddling the border between China's Jilin province and North Korea's Ryanggang province, Mount Changbai rises like a divine monument from the surrounding pine forests and basalt plateaus. An active stratovolcano, the largest on the Korean peninsula and one of the most enigmatic in East Asia. Changbai is crowned by Tianqi, Heavenly Lake, a near-perfect crater lake sitting at over 2,100 meters above sea level. The volcano last erupted with massive force in 946 CE in an event known as the Millennium Eruption, one of the most powerful eruptions in recorded human history. But despite this cataclysmic past, the mountain today evokes a sense of divine serenity, especially on the seldom visited western rim. Unlike the more popular northern rim, which offers paved roads, staircases, cable cars, and designated viewing platforms, the western edge is raw and elemental. It is accessible only through long treks, infrequent weather windows, and the permission of both weather and mountain. The terrain here is dramatically different from the lusher, spruce-lined slopes below. As you ascend, the forests begin to thin into alpine tundra, then dissolve entirely into barren volcanic scree and razor-edged rock formations. The wind here never stops. It roars across the exposed rim, howling through volcanic gullies and whistling across the ancient pumice fields that dot the summit zone. The western crater wall is among the steepest sections of the caldera, its ridges narrow and serrated like a broken crown. Here, one stands not at the edge of a placid lake, but at the precipice of Earth's molten memory. The ground is unstable, layers of ash and frozen soil crumbling beneath each step. Snow lingers here even into the early summer months, clinging to the dark volcanic rock like a white veil drawn over obsidian skin. The smell of minerals is faint but persistent: sulfur, ice, basalt. You're reminded constantly that the mountain is alive beneath your feet. From this vantage point, Heavenly Lake takes on an entirely different dimension. Seen from the north or south, it's a stunning sight, an alpine lake of surreal turquoise, ringed by 16 jagged peaks. But from the west, it becomes something else, an immense eye, deep and unknowable, reflecting the sky with a clarity that feels more like a vision than a reflection. The waters here are often ruffled by wind, and clouds are prone to spill over the rim like celestial rivers. In moments of sudden stillness, the lake mirrors the heavens with such perfect symmetry that it becomes hard to tell which is real. Legends abound regarding this lake and its western rim. Local Korean and Manchu folklore speaks of gods who descended upon this edge of the caldera, of a giant that slumbered beneath the lake and whose sighs became storms. Korean mythology names it the birthplace of Dan-gun, the mythical founder of the Korean nation. The Manchu, whose very imperial lineage claimed origin from the sacred forests of Changbai, considered the western rim the most spiritually potent part of the entire mountain. For them, this was not merely a mountain, it was the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar that connected the heavens and the earth. Today, very few people, locals or outsiders, make it to this ridge. The routes are difficult, with no formal infrastructure. Some attempt to approach from the west by skirting the lesser-used forest roads that loop north from Antu or descend from the Korean border regions. The path involves not just climbing, but navigating high-elevation wetlands, volcanic gravel fields, and scree slopes that can crumble beneath even experienced mountaineers. There are stories of sudden snow squalls sweeping over the rim in summer, reducing visibility to a few meters and forcing hikers to retreat mid-ascent. But for those who endure, the rewards are otherworldly. From certain outcrops, you can see not only the lake but far across the border into the untouched, forested ridges of North Korea. Wildlife, rarely spotted elsewhere on the mountain, sometimes reveals itself in this isolated haven. You might see the footprints of an Amur tiger, ghost of the northeastern wilderness, or the fleeting silhouette of a Manchurian wapiti slipping into mist. Even rarer is the Ushuri black bear, whose presence here is whispered about by researchers and trackers but confirmed only in fleeting sightings. The silence on the western rim is not simply the absence of noise, it is the presence of ancient sound. It's the sound of wind brushing across volcanic glass, of water lapping unseen far below, of memories trapped in the rocks. It feels as though the volcano itself is listening. Standing on the edge, one does not feel triumphant, but humbled. It is a place that dwarfs you, not only physically, but spiritually. You do not conquer the western rim. You bear witness to it. Sunsets here are astonishing. Because of the elevation and the clarity of the air, the sun does not simply set, it dissolves. It melts behind the lake, turning the sky to molten gold and then bleeding it into violet and indigo. The reflections on heavenly lake ripple like oil, shifting with the wind, alive with light. In these moments, the western rim feels untethered from time. You could be in the year 946 CE, watching the sky as the earth prepares to rupture. Or you could be in some distant future, long after memory has faded, the volcano still standing sentinel over a world unrecognizable. Mount Changbai's western crater rim remains one of the most unreal places on Earth, not because it is inaccessible or unseen, but because it resists comprehension. It is not designed for comfort, spectacle, or even understanding. It is a place that demands silence, endurance, and respect. It is the breath of an ancient god held in stillness, the edge of a living lake that remembers fire, and a reminder that the Earth's most sacred places are often those least shaped by human hands. In the southern outstretched fingers of the mighty Wuling Range, a lesser-known marvel exists. Mount Wuling's South Spur, a rugged and surreal extension of the geological fantasyland that is Zhangjiajie. While Zhangjiajie's stone pillars and floating peaks have gained global fame through film and tourism, the South Spur quietly persists in obscurity, cradled in thick forest, hemmed by winding canyons, and echoing with the sounds of birdsong and breeze rather than crowds and cameras. It is an extension not only of the mountain system but of the spirit of the land itself, wilder, deeper, and more untouched than its photogenic northern siblings. Mount Wuling is part of the Greater Wulingyuan Scenic Area in Huen Province, a UNESCO World Heritage Site composed of quartzite sandstone mountains that have eroded into impossible shapes, columns, bridges, pinnacles, and knife-like ridges. The South Spur, however, slips out from the main concentration of these famous formations and plunges into a denser, more vertical world. Here, the landscape is steeper, the forest thicker, the cliffs higher and less traveled. While the core of Zhangjiajie may dazzle with its verticality, the South Spur overwhelms with immersion. It doesn't ask you to look at it, it asks you to enter it. What immediately defines the South Spur is its canyons, deep, shadowed, and cloaked in cloud forest vegetation. These gorges are carved by rain-fed rivers that run turquoise and fierce, especially after summer downpours. They rush over slickstone beds, cascade down polished drops, and disappear beneath moss-covered overhangs. In the rainy season, the air becomes thick with mist that coils through the treetops like ancient breath, blurring the line between the physical and the imagined. This is a place where folklore breathes easily, and where stories of mountain spirits and shape-shifting animals don't feel far-fetched. Above the canyons, the forested ridgelines of the South Spur rise with improbable grace. Unlike the northern Zhangjiajie zones, where isolated towers pierce the sky, the South Spur flows like waves, steep, green ridges one after another, cut sharply by fault lines and streams. Walking along these ridges feels like walking along the spine of a sleeping dragon, each segment rising and falling, breathing in a rhythm older than any dynasty. The trees here are diverse and ancient, towering firs, wild chestnuts, camphor, and twisted pines that seem to grow straight out of the rock. In spring, the forest floor explodes with rhododendrons, lilies, and 1,000 species of ferns, their spores painting the air with a fine, pollen-rich mist. The South Spur is not a curated landscape. Trails here are old hunter paths or animal tracks, marked by carved stones left behind by shepherds or, in some places, hanging strips of red cloth tied to branches as spiritual markers. These cloths, often renewed each year during local festivals, are prayers to the mountain gods, guardians of the slopes and valleys. The local Tujia and Miao minority groups have long held this stretch of mountain sacred. Oral histories tell of exiles and ancestors who fled dynastic upheaval to find refuge in these ridges, carving out hidden villages that thrived for generations in perfect harmony with the mountain's rhythms. In some secluded hollows, travelers still come upon abandoned hamlets, where stone houses lie crumbled under creeping vines and fig trees grow out of rooftops. Yet the land is never silent. Crickets sing in multitudes, tree frogs croak from invisible ledges, and gibbons, rare, ghost-like creatures, sometimes call to each other across wide canyon spans in a song that seems to belong to another age. Wildlife thrives in this sanctuary. The clouded leopard, so rarely seen that it is considered a phantom by some, roams these ridgelines. Musk deer, golden pheasants, macaques, and even the occasional Asiatic black bear have been spotted by researchers and locals alike. Overhead, raptors glide silently, rising on updrafts that sweep up the canyon walls. The ecology of the South Spur is extraordinarily intact, precisely because it has remained so difficult to access. Much of the area remains unsurveyed by modern science, and new species of insects and plants continue to be discovered by the few biologists permitted to work here. Weather in the South Spur is moody and theatrical. Morning often begins with a cool mist that drapes the canopy in silk, followed by shafts of sunlight that pierce through in beams so vivid they seem physical. By afternoon, the humidity builds, sometimes breaking into sudden storms that bring thunder echoing across the cliffs like the drums of gods. Rainwater runs down every groove of rock, turning trails into rivulets and washing over stone steps carved hundreds of years ago. Then, just as quickly, the clouds lift and the mountains glisten in renewed clarity, the forest gleaming as if newly born. One of the most surreal features of the Mount Wuling South Spur is its hanging valleys, suspended basins perched high between two ridges, holding unexpected meadows or sun-drenched terraces. These places, when discovered, feel like secrets the mountain is sharing only with you. Some are filled with wildflowers, others with quiet ponds ringed by reeds. In late autumn, the trees around these valleys burn with red and amber, and the air smells of moss and drying leaves, a scent that feels both nostalgic and eternal. Spiritual energy here is not something installed by architecture, it is in the land itself. The people of the surrounding valleys hold seasonal rituals at certain waterfalls and cliff altars. Offerings of rice wine, salt, and hand-woven talismans are made to the Qiyunshan, mountain gods who are said to control weather, protect livestock, and guide lost travelers. It is believed that to sleep without permission in the South Spur invites dreams of the past, not your own, but the mountains. Dreams of ancient battles, of wandering hermits, of deer chased by unseen predators through silent, moonlit woods. There is no summit in the traditional sense. The South Spur does not crescendo to a peak, it undulates endlessly, each ridge rising only to yield to another, slightly higher one beyond. The reward here is not conquest, but immersion. To walk here is to surrender to the forest, to the stone, to the mountain's breath. It is a place that teaches you slowness, presence, humility. Mount Wuling's South Spur is unreal not because it is fantastical in the cinematic sense, but because it reveals how nature, left to its own devices, can build a world more intricate, more dramatic, and more emotionally resonant than anything constructed by human imagination. Here, every cliff is a memory, every gorge a passage, every ridge a question posed to the sky. And for those who choose to listen, the South Spur offers not just beauty, but communion, with wilderness, with history, and with the deeper, older rhythms of the earth itself. Rising like a ghosted mirage between desert voids and highland skies, Mount Taihang, a colossal, desolate stronghold within the Altun Mountains, stands at the geographical frontier where the frigid backbone of the Kunlun Range begins to fracture into the scorched sands of the Taklamakan Desert and the vast salt flats of Qinghai. It is a place of elemental collision, where snow and sand exist side by side, and where life, if it appears at all, moves slowly, cautiously, in respectful negotiation with the unforgiving terrain. Few outsiders know its name. Fewer still have ever stepped upon its rock-strewn flanks. And yet, to those who do, Mount Taihang offers a vision of Earth that feels utterly unbound, timeless, hostile, transcendent. The Altun Mountains, also spelled Altun Tag, in which Mount Taihang sits like a silent sentinel, form a major geological barrier between the Tibetan Plateau and the lowlands of the Tarim Basin. The entire range stretches over 1,300 kilometers, slicing across the borderlands of western Qinghai and southern Xinjiang. Mount Taihang, while not the tallest peak in the range, is one of its most mythic, partly because of its stark beauty, partly because of the difficulty of even reaching it. To arrive here is to cross through wastelands. There are no cities, no villages, no inns. The roads are gravel at best, and often vanish into shifting dunes or evaporated lake beds. Military checkpoints and restricted zones, the region due to its proximity to sensitive borders and protected ecological zones. The area around Mount Taihang is designated part of the Altun Mountains National Nature Reserve, one of the largest and most remote conservation zones in China, covering over 450,000 square kilometers, yet with barely any human presence. It is a realm not built for people. It belongs, fiercely and fully, to the land itself. The mountain emerges gradually as one approaches. From afar, it looks like nothing more than a slightly raised line of pale rock on the horizon. But as you near, it reveals its colossal scale. The slopes rise sharply from the high-altitude desert steppe, changing from dry, gravel-strewn plains to cracked volcanic rock, then to glacial scree and ice-scoured ridges. At its summit, over 5,800 meters above sea level, permanent snowfields gleam beneath a sky so clear and distant it feels alien. What makes Mount Taihang truly unreal is this juxtaposition, the blinding white of snow and ice suspended above the lifeless ochres and russets of the desert below. In no other place does the world feel so deliberately divided into opposing forces. The bottom is scorching, windblown, dehydrated. The top is silent, still, and frozen. These contrasts are not seasonal, they are simultaneous. Standing at the mid-elevation slopes, one can look down at dust devils spiraling across salt flats and up at icicles dangling from rock faces. It is an environment that defies biological comfort. Even experienced climbers report headaches, disorientation, and deep physical fatigue, not only from the altitude but from the psychic weight of being in a place so utterly removed from human context. And yet, even here, life endures, scarce, stealthy, and astonishing. The Altun Mountains are home to some of China's rarest high-altitude fauna. The wild Bactrian camel, a critically endangered species, is one of the few mammals capable of surviving the scorching heat of the desert by day and the freezing cold of the mountains by night. They roam the flats and foothills of the Altun, feeding on salt-tolerant shrubs and digging into ice-covered springs for water. Snow leopards prowl the upper ridges, moving with eerie grace across icy ledges. Tibetan argali, or mountain sheep, balance on impossible cliff paths, and the occasional sighting of Tibetan wild ass or goitered gazelle adds to the dreamlike impossibility of survival in this place. Above them all soars the lemurgia, or bearded vulture, a huge, ancient bird with a taste for bone marrow and a wingspan that casts shadows across the scree. Its silhouette is a common sight here, gliding silently through the wind above the snowfields of Mount Taihang. Many local legends treat this bird as a spirit guide, a guardian of mountain passes, or a soul carrier between realms. In this world of extremes, even myth finds firm footing. The weather on Taihang is utterly unpredictable. Winds can rise from dead calm to hurricane force in a matter of minutes. Snow squalls blind the landscape even in summer. Temperatures swing from 35 degrees Celsius at the base to -20 degrees Celsius at night on the high slopes. Flash floods in the desert foothills and avalanches on the upper flanks are equally deadly, and with virtually no human settlement in any direction, help is neither close nor likely. Still, for those who reach it, whether nomads, scientists, rangers, or spiritual seekers, Mount Taihang offers a kind of purity no modern sanctuary can replicate. There are no paths, no temples, no signs, only rock, wind, and sky. Yet this blankness is not emptiness. It is presence in its most distilled form. Geologists have long been fascinated by Taihang and the Altun Range for another reason: their deep, seismically active faults. The Altun Tag Fault, a major tectonic boundary, runs directly through the region, marking the northern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. Over millions of years, this fault has uplifted and fractured the land, creating a fractured staircase of strata and ridges that record the history of continental collisions. Some researchers say the rocks here are among the oldest exposed surfaces in all of China, raw planetary memory visible at the surface, unlayered by civilization or erosion. To local Yugur and Kazakh herders who occasionally graze animals at the lower, less hostile elevations, Mount Taihang is considered sacred, though few dare approach its core. Stories speak of lights on the summit, of voices echoing in the wind, and of travelers who return from the high passes changed. Silent, thoughtful, touched by something beyond words. Though no major religious structure exists here, the mountain commands awe by sheer force of its being. Pilgrims from as far away as Gansu and Qinghai have been known to trek near its flanks, leaving stones stacked in prayer towers or pieces of colored cloth flapping from cairns, a plea to the spirit of the heights. Perhaps the most surreal aspect of Mount Taihang is its visual contradiction: to stand at the lip of a glacial cirque and look out over a sea of dunes. To feel the crunch of ice underfoot while watching dust storms crawl across an endless beige horizon. It is as though two worlds, Arctic and Sahara, have been stitched together by invisible hands. It reminds us that the Earth's most otherworldly places are not always hidden in jungles or undersea canyons, but right here, on dry, cracked rock beneath ancient skies. In the end, Mount Taihang doesn't seek to inspire admiration. It inspires reverence. It is the definition of the sublime, dangerous, silent, and vast. A place that reminds you how very small you are, and how beautiful the earth can be when left entirely to its own creation. It is a mountain not just of snow and stone, but of myth, memory, and the enduring will of life itself. Rising from the rugged core of southwestern Sichuan province, Mount Daliang, or Daliangshan, is not simply a mountain range. It is a land of living tradition, spiritual intensity, and dramatic natural power. This mountain is not defined by a single summit but by a sweeping system of sky-piercing ridges, ancient forests, and hidden valleys, all folded into the larger Daliang Mountains range, which stretches across the borderlands between Sichuan and Yunnan. It is here, in these soaring elevations and deep-cut canyons, that the Yi people, one of China's largest and most culturally distinct ethnic minorities, have made their home for centuries. And it is in this place that myth, ecology, and isolation converge to create one of the most unreal places on the planet. Mount Daliang's terrain is dramatic to the point of being dreamlike. The mountains seem to shoot upward from the earth without warning, their jagged ridges tracing unpredictable lines through a landscape that shifts rapidly from subtropical forests to alpine meadows. Steep, forested slopes plunge into narrow river gorges, and sudden plateaus emerge like islands in a green sea of pine and cedar. Cloud-covered drapes over the peaks like flowing silk, rolling across the landscape in thick sheets that seem to have minds of their own. The skies here are changeable, often violent. Lightning storms lash the ridgelines, and heavy mists render the world ghost-like and silent. There is a wild, primeval quality to the entire region that makes one feel not just far from modernity, but from time itself. Much of this remoteness is due to geography. The Daliang Mountains are part of the Greater Hengduan system, where the land fractures into an intricate web of mountain chains and river valleys. Travel between one village and the next, even today, can involve hours of hiking, precarious switchbacks, and hanging bridges. Historically, this isolation allowed the Yi culture to flourish unbroken, preserving customs, languages, and spiritual systems that have disappeared elsewhere. The Yi people, also historically called the Lolo or Nosu, form a deeply spiritual, traditionally pastoral society that has long regarded the mountains not merely as land but as living ancestors. Mount Daliang is more than backdrop, it is kin. Yi shamans, or Baimo, still conduct rituals at sacred groves and rocky outcrops, speaking ancient prayers to the spirits of earth, fire, water, and wind. Certain peaks within the Daliang range are considered so sacred that they are approached only during specific festivals, and always with offerings: jewels of pork fat, stalks of wild grain, cups of corn liquor, feathers, or hand-woven cloth. Every feature of the mountain has a name, a story, and a personality. The deep animist worldview of the Yi people is reflected in the dense mythology that binds every tree, stream, and thundercloud to the human soul. Walking in the Daliang Mountains is a sensory onslaught. The air is thick with the smells of damp earth, pine resin, and wood smoke. Birds cry from unseen branches high above, and strange silhouettes of fungi bloom from the trunks of moss-covered trees. In the spring and early summer, wildflowers blanket the meadows: tiger lilies, blue poppies, primroses, and rare orchids that seem to glow in the twilight. But even more astonishing is the fauna of this region. The Daliangshan forests are home to elusive and endangered creatures, including the red panda, the clouded leopard, and the golden snub-nosed monkey. a creature with a face so haunting and human-like that it has inspired folklore across the region. Higher elevations are patrolled by Chinese serows, shaggy goat antelopes that leap with stunning agility across cliffs that would stop any human in their tracks. The rivers that cut through the Daliang Range are icy and rapid, often bordered by bamboo forests and sheer cliffs. They've carved their way through the rock over millennia, forming deep canyons and high waterfalls, some of which plummet over 100 meters into pools that shimmer like liquid jade. The sound of rushing water is ever present, even when hidden from view. These rivers sustain the valleys below, providing water for the Yi villages scattered along narrow terraces and ridges. Mount Daliang has also been a place of historical struggle. Its remoteness made it a strategic refuge during the revolutionary period in the 20th century. Communist forces moving through Sichuan and Yunnan relied on mountain routes through the Daliang Range to evade nationalist troops and reach sympathetic minority communities. Some villages here still remember the passage of soldiers and the resistance efforts that played out across these peaks. Even today, remnants of warrior stone paths and lookout points cling to high slopes, gradually being reclaimed by moss and vine. But the Daliang Range is not only a story of remoteness, it is a story of transformation. In recent years, as China has moved to alleviate rural poverty and develop transportation infrastructure, tunnels and new roads have begun slicing through the mountain's stubborn barriers. The once perilous path from Xichang to Zhaojuer or Butuo has become more accessible, allowing for medical aid, education, and trade, but also the slow infiltration of urban influence. While progress has brought undeniable benefits, many fear that the cultural purity of the Yi Highlands will be eroded. There is a tension in the air here, between past and future, between the rootedness of stone and the velocity of concrete. Still, Mount Daliang remains largely untamed. Tourists seldom venture here, deterred by lack of infrastructure and the difficulty of permits. This makes the experience of standing on one of its narrow ridgelines, above cloud-draped valleys and knife-edge cliffs, feel like a privilege granted only to the most determined. In the golden light of early morning, when the first rays spill across blackened forests and illuminate the distant crowns of hidden peaks, the entire range takes on a spectral beauty. Mists rise from the valleys like incense, curling around prayer flags strung between ancient pine trees. The silence is absolute, and in that silence, one can still hear the mountain breathe, through the rustling of cedar leaves, the distant bell of a goat's collar, or the chanting of a Baimo priest as he kneels before a sacred rock. Mount Daliang is more than a wonder of geography. It is a living museum of ancestral memory, a repository of ecological wealth, and a cultural stronghold that resists forgetting. To journey here is not simply to climb a mountain. It is to descend into depth, of spirit, of time, of connection. It is to find oneself in a realm where the earth is still allowed to speak, and where its voice is not drowned out by steel or signal, but amplified by snow, shadow, and song. Clinging to the southern frontier of Chongqing Municipality, where the great city's concrete arteries dissolve into lush wilderness, the eastern slope of Mount Jinfo, also known as Jinfoshan or Golden Buddha Mountain, emerges like a geological paradox. A karst plateau raised to the heavens, steeped in spiritual significance, botanical mystery, and dizzying elevation changes that defy all expectation of what Chongqing's borderlands should look like. The eastern slope, especially, remains one of the least traveled, least documented, and most awe-inspiring segments of the mountain's massif. It is here that the landscape takes on a surreal character. Vertical cliffs blanketed in mist, echoing caverns, and hidden pockets of rare alpine orchids that bloom in wild defiance against bare rock and biting winds. Mount Jinfo, overall, is part of the Delu mountain range, a karst system known for its towering limestone formations, deep underground rivers, and vast cave networks. While the mountain's summit reaches just under 2,250 meters, its eastern slope drops precipitously, plunging into the surrounding valleys in a cascade of sheer cliffs, terraced forest, and cloud-hung precipices that give it the appearance of a massive geological staircase ascending into the clouds. The contrast between its towering edges and the rich, biodiverse interior creates a living mosaic that feels torn from a fantasy novel. Unlike the more developed western and central access points to Jinfoshan, where cable cars and ecological walkways now ferry urban visitors to the more familiar vistas, the eastern slope remains largely untouched, tangled in wild vegetation, patrolled by birds and insects, and haunted by the whispers of ancient mountain ascetics. It is this isolation that has allowed some of China's rarest alpine plants to survive and flourish. Most remarkable among them is a family of orchids, some species so rare they are known only to a few Chinese botanists, whose blossoms bloom only in narrow fissures and shaded moss caves. These orchids are known for their iridescent petals that shimmer between lavender, pink, and silver depending on the ambient light. Some are said to emit a fragrance only detectable just after rainfall, as though the mountain decides when it wants to be smelled. The terrain here is what makes Jinfo's eastern slope nearly impenetrable. Karst geology is infamous for being unstable and treacherous. Razor-sharp ridges, sinkholes hidden beneath underbrush, sudden chasms, and narrow ledges no wider than a handspan. Rainwater has spent millions of years eating away at the limestone, creating a honeycomb beneath the forest that collapses in places into vast caverns, some of them entirely unexplored. A few known caves on the east side drop several hundred meters into the earth, decorated with crystallized stalagmites the size of tree trunks and underground lakes so still they resemble sheets of black glass. In some of these hidden grottos, monks and hermits have meditated in complete isolation, and inscriptions carved into the stone record forgotten teachings from the Tang and Song dynasties. This slope is also home to the Jinfo Nature Reserve, one of the most important ecological preserves in southwest China. A staggering 5,000 species of plant life are said to exist on and around Mount Jinfo, including over 400 species of orchids and rare relic species dating back to the Tertiary period, survivors of prehistoric climates. Botanists have described it as a living fossil museum. Tree ferns, cycads, and ginkgos grow here not just as ornamentals but as wild ancestors, scattered along hidden ridgelines and dripping with dew. This ancient flora forms the basis of a delicate ecological ladder, supporting everything from tree frogs and butterflies to golden pheasants and cloud leopards. But the experience of being on the eastern slope goes beyond botany and geology. There is a spiritual stillness to this place that defies logic. The name Jinfo, Golden Buddha, has deep religious roots, and for centuries, this mountain has been a site of Buddhist pilgrimage. Monasteries and meditation caves still cling to impossible ledges, and pilgrims still make the trek up crumbling stone paths, some barefoot, some in silence, seeking the numinous presence said to reside at the mountain's heart. The eastern slope, largely free from the infrastructure that has crept into other parts of Jinfo, still feels like sacred ground, raw, wind-carved, and profoundly quiet. During the dawn hours, when the rising sun cuts through the heavy mountain fog, the karst cliffs of the eastern face glow in hues of ochre, peach, and gold, like the gilded statue of a reclining Buddha hidden behind layers of silk. Swallows dive through the mist, and the faint sound of water dripping from moss-covered rock fills the air. If one walks far enough, high enough, beyond the worn trails and into the untamed crests, the sounds of the city dissolve, replaced by something elemental. Wind racing through ferns, the soft thud of a goat's hooves on stone, the rustling of leaves as unseen creatures pass behind. Here, in this forgotten sector of Chongqing's greatest natural cathedral, one can truly understand what it means for a place to be unreal. It is not merely the scale or the isolation or the rare flora that grants Mount Jinfo's eastern slope this title. It is the sensation that you have left behind the known world and entered a place where the earth dreams aloud. A place where stone has memory, mist has intelligence, and every orchid is a flame burning quietly against the ravages of time. Mount Jinfo's eastern slope is not for every traveler. It demands humility, patience, and reverence. But for those who dare to walk its ledges and breathe its hidden perfumes, it offers not just beauty, but revelation. It is one of those rarest of places where geology becomes poetry, and the wilderness does not just surround you, it absorbs you. Deep in the northern reaches of Sichuan province, where the ridges of the Minshan mountain range begin to dissolve into the misty folds of ancient highland forest, lies Mount Pingwu, or Qiyunshan, a wild and largely unsung massif nestled within one of China's most ecologically significant regions. While its name might not echo through travel circles or appear in glossy brochures, Pingwu is a mountain of quiet majesty and hidden significance. It is a forest-cloaked bastion of biodiversity, ancestral territory of the giant panda, and a geographical heartland that pulses with the richness of Sichuan's natural heritage. Located in Pingwu County, an area that sits between the well-known cities of Mianyang to the south and the famed Jiaoteigaga Valley to the north, Mount Pingwu serves as an ecological transition zone between Sichuan's humid lowlands and the lofty Tibetan Plateau to the west. It is here, on these steep ridges and cloud-shadowed slopes, that some of China's most iconic wildlife lives in secret. The Minshan Range, to which Pingwu belongs, is globally recognized as one of the last strongholds of the wild giant panda, and Qiyunshan itself has long been part of key panda conservation zones overseen by China's forestry and biodiversity authorities. These forests, thick with arrow bamboo, fir, spruce, and moss-covered hardwoods, form the backdrop for one of the most delicate ecological relationships on Earth. The giant panda, that solitary and elusive symbol of conservation, survives here by a fragile thread, sustained by the seasonal cycles of bamboo flowering and protected by the mountain's remoteness. While the species population remains small and vulnerable, Qiyunshan's terrain, isolated, rugged, and deeply forested, has allowed it to remain a refuge. Sightings are rare, but camera traps have confirmed their presence year after year. Their quiet paths run along the mountain's north-facing slopes, where cool, damp valleys offer optimal conditions for bamboo growth. But pandas are not the only creatures that call Mount Qiyunshan home. The area is a UNESCO-designated zone of ecological importance, host to over 70 mammal species and 150 species of birds, many of them endangered. Among them are the golden snub-nosed monkey, with its ghostly blue face and flame-colored fur, the elusive clouded leopard, that phantom of the high forests, and the tarkeen, a stocky goat antelope whose strange features give it an almost mythological appearance. The mountain's elevation gradient, rising from valley floors around 1,300 meters to peaks over 4,000 meters, creates a stunning range of microclimates, allowing tropical, subtropical, and alpine flora to coexist across a compressed vertical span. Geologically, Qiyunshan is a marvel of limestone ridges, granite spines, and ancient tectonic upheaval. Its rock faces are scarred by glacial movement and carved by the flow of rivers that cut through deep ravines. Waterfalls tumble down cliffs wrapped in vines, and natural bridges have formed from stone worn hollow by centuries of rain and melt. In some parts, entire groves of old-growth conifers stand untouched, gnarled and towering, their bark textured like elephant hide, their canopies swaying like sentinels. Amid this natural grandeur, traces of human history linger quietly, half consumed by vegetation. The Qiong and Tibetan ethnic minorities have long inhabited the regions surrounding Qiyunshan, and their influence is etched into the mountain's rhythms. Remote hamlets built of stone and timber cling to ridges and slopes, often draped in prayer flags or set beside shamanic totems. There are oral histories passed down through generations, of mountain spirits, talking animals, and sacred groves where no axe must ever fall. These legends, while mystical, reflect a cultural reverence for nature that has likely contributed to the preservation of the region's biodiversity. In the valleys and on the lower slopes, remnants of ancient pilgrimage routes and fortified hill stations remain, a testament to the mountain's past role as both a spiritual boundary and a strategic frontier. During times of conflict, particularly in the Ming and Qing dynasties, mountain trails like those in Qiyunshan served as hidden passageways between Sichuan and Tibet, their dense cover concealing warriors, messengers, and monks alike. Today, many of these paths are nearly reclaimed by forest, covered in moss and fallen leaves, the stones smoothed by time and rain. Yet despite its wonders, Mount Qiyunshan remains largely unknown to mass tourism. This is partly due to its inaccessibility, the roads are few, the terrain treacherous, and the infrastructure underdeveloped. But that very isolation is what has protected it. For the adventurous, ecologically-minded traveler or the solitary researcher, Qiyunshan offers something increasingly rare, the chance to witness a mountain in its primal state, untouched by commercial exploitation or overdevelopment. Trekking here is less a recreational activity and more an immersion, one where each footstep is answered by the rustle of leaves, the call of unseen birds, and the hush of ancient trees breathing together in quiet unison. In spring, the mountain transforms into a riot of color, rhododendrons in pink and crimson, magnolias blooming in ivory and blush, orchids peeking from the forest floor like hidden treasures. Mist moves slowly across the canopy, casting silver light on dewdrops that cling to leaves like stars fallen from the sky. In autumn, golden leaves blanket the trails, and the air carries the cool, sharp scent of moss and distant snowfall. Even in winter, when the higher ridges glaze over with snow and the air becomes thin and piercing, Qiyunshan does not lose its mystique, it merely becomes quieter, deeper, more dreamlike. For those who seek spectacle, Qiyunshan is not a mountain that will shout its beauty. It whispers. It hums. It waits. And in that patience lies its greatest strength, a timeless sanctuary, where Earth's memory is held not in words or ruins but in the heartbeat of trees, the tracks of animals, and the dance of fog around its ancient flanks. Mount Pingwu stands not as a tourist destination but as a living cathedral, where every organism, be it panda, orchid, or moss, plays its part in a symphony written across millennia. It is one of those places where the unreal becomes not something invented, but something so wholly true that it defies the limits of expectation. To walk there is to feel the weight of the natural world pressing gently but powerfully upon the soul, a reminder that in some corners of the earth, wonder has not been lost. To the northwest of Yunnan province, where the mighty Jinfo River slices through the deepest gorges in Asia and where the world feels suspended between sky and earth, lies the majestic Mount Harbor, and more specifically, its north slope, a lesser-trodden realm of glacial valleys, cascading wildflower meadows, and sheer cliffs crowned with snow. While Mount Harbor itself is well known among seasoned hikers for its relatively accessible summit and panoramic views, the north face of the mountain offers a vastly different experience, one that is raw, untamed, and astonishingly surreal. Mount Harbor, with Macron Zushan, which rises to a height of 5,396 meters, 17,703 feet, stands on the eastern flank of the legendary Tiger Leaping Gorge, opposite the world-renowned Yulong Snow Mountain. But unlike the more developed southern approach, which sees a growing number of trekkers attempting summit routes from base camps, the north slope of Harbor remains isolated and largely untouched. Hidden from the gaze of tourists, it unfolds into a landscape shaped by ancient glacier and ceaseless seasonal metamorphosis. Here, on the northern aspect, the sun hangs lower, casting long shadows across jagged moraine fields, glacial troughs, and high alpine tarns, remnants of Ice Age sculpting that left deep scars and swooping ridgelines throughout the terrain. The glacial valleys here are not just geological artifacts, they are living corridors, now filled with streams that braid their way through flower-strewn alpine meadows, carving life into an otherwise austere elevation. In the early summer months, these meadows erupt in a wild mosaic of color and fragrance. Primulas, edelweiss, blue poppies, rhododendrons, and alpine gentians bloom in overlapping symphonies of violet, blue, white, and yellow, attracting clouds of pollinators that dance in the thin mountain air. The meadows themselves are stitched between rock outcrops and glacial boulders, each patch seeming like a forgotten garden planted by the mountain itself. One could walk for hours and never see another human, only the whispers of wind, the rustle of marmots, and the occasional clatter of distant rocks dislodged by unseen creatures above. Above the meadows loom vertical limestone cliffs, their surfaces painted with orange lichens and etched with deep crevices. Snow lingers here long into the warmer months, tucked into gullies and shadowed shelves that see little light. These cliffs often form natural amphitheaters, silent stone cathedrals where the air is heavy with the scent of pine, ice, and mountain herbs. At higher altitudes, permafrost holds fast, and frost flowers can be seen forming in the early hours, delicate and crystalline. What makes the north slope of Harbor especially rare is its ecological transition zone. This region sits at the convergence of temperate forest, subalpine shrubland, and periglacial tundra. Such intersections give rise to incredibly high biodiversity, including species found nowhere else on Earth. Hidden in these woods are red pandas, Chinese serows, and rare bird species like the blood pheasant and snow partridge. There are even occasional sightings of leopards and lynxes, elusive predators that leave only tracks and clawed bark as proof of their passing. The climate on the northern side is colder and more volatile than the sunnier southern trails. Storms roll in suddenly, driven by monsoon moisture from the south crashing into colder currents from the Tibetan Plateau. Rain becomes sleet, then snow. The trails, if they exist, are often little more than shepherd paths, used by local Nashi herders guiding yaks through the upper pastures. These highland communities, who have coexisted with the mountain for centuries, pass down folklore about Harbor's spirit, often referring to it as a quiet brother to the more dramatic Yulong across the gorge. The name Harbor is said to mean golden flower in the Nashi language, and nowhere is this more fitting than on its northern slope in full bloom. But there's another layer to the name as well. Some say it refers to the golden horn of the peak that catches the setting sun, turning brilliant orange and gold in the late evening light. This daily event, brief and ethereal, is something almost never witnessed from the north due to its hidden angle. But if one climbs high enough, just past the tree line, where lichens crunch beneath your boots and the wind speaks in long, icy howls, one may catch that sight, the peak igniting like a beacon against the deepening sky, mirrored dimly in the glassy pools below. There is also glacial exploration to be done here, though it is not for the faint-hearted. The remnants of old ice fields still cling to the highest parts of the north slope. These are active periglacial zones, where one can witness freeze-thaw cycles in motion, carving new grooves into stone and creating patterned ground formations rarely seen at such altitudes in this region of China. In some spots, you may even hear the creak and groan of compacted ice as it shifts deep beneath the rock, a reminder that even the most seemingly inert landscapes are alive with movement. For mountaineers seeking solitude or biologists researching isolated ecosystems, the North Slope is a treasure trove. For poets and dreamers, it's a place that borders the imaginary. There are few trails, fewer maps, and almost no infrastructure, but that is precisely the point. Mount Harbour's north side is not curated for comfort. It is wild, primal, and deeply humbling. It does not shout for attention. It reveals itself only to those willing to listen. No matter where you stand on its north slope, be it in a flower-choked glen, on a windswept ridge, or beside a silent, glacial lake, Mount Harbour seems to murmur with ancient memory. It feels like a page from a myth you almost forgot, a landscape that stirs something deep in the bones. It's not the highest or most dramatic mountain in Yunnan, but in its austerity and untouched beauty, it may very well be the most sacred. Hidden within the emerald heart of Guangxi, where mists coil through dense subtropical forest and limestone spires rise like ancient monuments to forgotten gods, lies the ethereal and scarcely known Mount Damiao, also called Damiaocean. This remarkable geological wonder occupies a quieter realm than the famous karst formations of Guilin and Yangshuo, yet it holds within it a world that seems plucked from an ancient dream, a network of jagged karst peaks, mirror-like lakes, and a jungle that hums with the secrets of time. Unlike more heavily touristed areas, Damiaocean resides in a relatively secluded pocket of northeastern Guangxi, nestled in a humid basin where the land folds in on itself. The mountain's name, meaning Great Temple Mountain, hints at its spiritual and cultural significance, but what truly sets it apart is not its temples or human history alone. Rather, it is the way raw geology and living nature coalesce into something almost otherworldly. Here, limestone cliffs erupt from the forest like colossal jade tusks, weathered into uncanny shapes by millennia of rainfall, wind, and subterranean erosion. The karst peaks that define Damiaocean are dramatic even by Guangxi's standards. Their sheer verticality is startling, crags that climb directly from the forest floor, slicing into the mist-heavy sky with little warning. These are not gentle, rolling hills, but razorback towers, many of which are densely clustered, forming near-impenetrable thickets of stone. This unique topography was formed through the slow, relentless dissolution of carbonate rock, sculpted by rainwater over millions of years. As water seeped into the porous limestone, it created deep sinkholes, hollow caverns, and sharp pinnacles, transforming what was once a seabed into a vertiginous stone labyrinth. But this isn't a dry or barren karst field. Quite the opposite. These peaks emerge from a living jungle, so thick and lush it seems to breathe. The valleys and narrow passes between the peaks are blanketed with ferns, orchids, mosses, and broad-leaf tropical trees, some of which grow right out of the rock walls themselves. In some places, vines cascade down limestone faces like green waterfalls. The sheer biodiversity of the region is staggering. It's not uncommon to hear gibbons calling from the treetops, or to spot hornbills, clouded leopards, or rare amphibians that have adapted to the cool, moist grottos tucked deep within the karst terrain. One of the most beguiling features of Damiaocean is its chain of serene, secluded lakes, often hidden between folds in the hills, fed by underground rivers and filtered by limestone beds. These lakes reflect the sky and the towering cliffs that surround them with perfect clarity, creating the illusion of inverted worlds. In the early morning, with fog still hovering like a thin silk veil, the scene becomes surreal. Still waters, spectral light, and the echo of birdsong reverberating between stone and sky. The largest of these water bodies, Qinglong Lake, meaning Blue Dragon Lake, lies at the base of one of the tallest peaks and is believed by locals to be the dwelling place of a mountain spirit. Fishermen here use traditional bamboo rafts, quietly gliding across the glassy surface as if reluctant to disturb the sacred silence. The lake is so clear in certain spots that the entire submerged forest floor is visible beneath, with ghostly tree trunks and rippling aquatic plants waving softly beneath the reflection of jagged stone above. Many of the karst towers house hidden caves, some of which plunge hundreds of meters into the earth. These underground networks are part of an ancient and vast karst hydrological system, where water disappears into sinkholes and re-emerges miles away in entirely different valleys. Inside the caves are stunning stalactites and stalagmites, draped in glowing mineral layers, natural sculptures formed over eons. Some caverns also preserve prehistoric relics, including fossilized shells and even the bones of early humans and extinct megafauna, hinting at the long and mysterious past of this place. But Qiyunshan is not just a marvel of natural history, it is a sanctuary of cultural heritage. Scattered among the cliffs and forests are temples, shrines, and weather-worn statues, many built directly into the rock face. Some of these are centuries old, nestled within caves or perched on high ledges accessible only by steep, narrow steps carved into the stone. The largest of these is the Great Temple of Damiao, from which the mountain takes its name. This temple complex, though modest in size, is famous for its fusion of Taoist and local animist traditions, and it remains a pilgrimage site for those seeking clarity, healing, or a deeper connection to nature. According to local folklore, Qiyunshan is home to guardian spirits and ancestral souls, believed to dwell within both the peaks and the waters. One story tells of a white deer that appears before great changes, glimpsed leaping from ridge to ridge just before a storm, an earthquake, or a death in the nearby village. The mountain's people revere this creature, carving it into temple walls and painting its silhouette on ceremonial banners. Despite its near-mythical beauty, Mount Damiao remains largely unfrequented by outside visitors. The reason is partly due to its remoteness and the lack of major transportation routes leading to its core areas. Access is often possible only via dirt roads or long foot treks through dense subtropical forest. But therein lies the magic. Without tourist infrastructure or commercialization, Qiyunshan has remained intact, unspoiled, and deeply immersive. It offers not the spectacle of Instagram photos, but the slow unfolding of awe, the silence of the jungle before dawn, the cry of a hawk above the cliffs, the way a single shaft of sunlight can pierce the mist and light up an entire green wall of stone. Qiyunshan does not call loudly to the world. It hums quietly to those who listen, draws in those willing to walk slowly, breathe deeply, and surrender to the ancient rhythm of jungle and stone. It is a place where the earth reveals its deep memory, etched in the lines of the rock, whispered in the rustle of leaves, and mirrored in the waters that have flowed here since long before human footsteps marked its forest paths. As the golden deserts of Ningxia begin to shift and undulate beneath the biting northern wind, one rugged and little-known mountain rises like a solitary sentinel over the dry Lurs plains, Mount Malan or Malinshan. Often overlooked in favor of China's more dramatic or forested ranges, Malinshan is a mountain of subtle grandeur, defined not by towering peaks or lush jungles but by its powerful presence amid arid isolation, its Lurs-covered slopes, and the ancient human stories etched into its weather-worn rock. Positioned near the boundary where the northern Chinese plateau begins to descend into the Ordos Desert, Mount Malan stands at the edge of two ecosystems, semi-arid highlands and arid basins. This transition zone has made it a place of great geological and cultural significance, with sweeping panoramic views of sun-bleached valleys, dust-churned steppe, and the muddy pulse of the Yellow River snaking in the distance. From the summit, one can see the undulating quilt of Lurs hills that stretch endlessly into the horizon, their rounded forms bearing the fingerprint of millennia of wind and time. Unlike forested peaks or glaciated ridges, Malinshan is a mountain of earth, its flanks composed largely of Lurs, a fine, powdery sediment left behind by ancient glacier and blown across China's north for thousands of years. This Lurs gives the mountain a striking ochre hue, particularly in the late afternoon sun when it glows with a soft golden light. The terrain here is fragile and prone to erosion, resulting in dramatic gullies and ravines that carve their way down the slopes like the veins of a weathered hand. These erosional features are not just aesthetically fascinating, they're a crucial part of China's environmental history, offering insights into soil loss, sediment transport, and ancient agricultural cycles. While vegetation is sparse compared to the verdant south, Malinshan is far from barren. Scattered across the slopes are scrub grasses, salt-resistant shrubs, and resilient species of wildflowers that bloom briefly in the spring, painting the dust-colored hills in strokes of violet, yellow, and white. In sheltered valleys and near seasonal streams, you may also find small groves of poplar or tamarisk, clinging to survival in the face of drought. These ecosystems, though delicate, are home to a surprising array of wildlife: desert foxes, steppe eagles, and even the occasional ibex navigating the ridgelines. But beyond its natural beauty, Mount Malan holds deep cultural significance, especially in modern Chinese memory. During the mid-20th century, Malinshan played a pivotal role in the development of China's defense and scientific infrastructure. This remote and harsh landscape was selected as a site for secret military research bases, due to its inaccessibility and wide vistas, ideal for security and monitoring. In fact, it became a symbol of self-reliance and sacrifice, where many Chinese scientists and engineers were stationed in obscurity, working on some of the country's most advanced projects under extreme conditions. As a result, Mount Malin is not only a geographic location but also a symbolic mountain, representing the grit and determination of a generation that toiled in isolation, often under grueling circumstances, to advance China's scientific frontier. Today, memorial plaques, monuments, and abandoned facilities still dot the base of the mountain. These crumbling relics stand in stark contrast to the emptiness around them, yet they are powerful reminders of a chapter in history that is rarely told but deeply respected within Chinese collective memory. Despite these remnants, tourism around Malinshan remains virtually non-existent. The mountain lies outside major transportation corridors, and the few who venture there are usually local herders, soil scientists, or photographers drawn by the surreal, minimalist beauty of the lush landscape. What these visitors find is a place steeped in quiet strength, a terrain shaped by wind, sun, and time, where each crumbling slope and each fissure in the earth tells a story of endurance. In the dry months, as hot winds blow across the ridges and the sky becomes a vast dome of relentless blue, Mount Malin takes on an almost Martian appearance, its lush cliffs glowing orange under the harsh sun, its gullies casting long shadows like scars. At dusk, the scene transforms again. The desert air cools rapidly, the sky burns in bands of purple and crimson, and silence deepens across the hills. It's at these moments, when the light is low and the wind carries only the occasional whistle through the canyons, that Melanchan's deep solitude and strange serenity become overwhelming. It is easy to overlook Mount Malin, especially in a country filled with lush mountains, thundering rivers, and ancient temples. But Malinshan asks for patience, not attention. It is not a place to rush through. It's a mountain best understood by those who appreciate absence as much as presence, simplicity over spectacle, and the quiet dignity of places that have watched history unfold in near silence. Standing upon its summit, with a 360-degree view of baked lush hills and endless wind-carved valleys, one feels as though they've left behind the present entirely. There is only sky, dust, and time, flowing slowly across the landscape like wind across the steppes. This forested lush highland, Mount Ziwiling, is not just a geographic formation. It is a solemn witness to some of the most formative and secretive moments in modern Chinese history. As the land ripples with gentle elevations and plunges into soft ravines, it seems, at first glance, an unremarkable extension of the broader lush plateau. But to tread through Ziwiling is to walk through the echoes of revolution, into a labyrinth of shaded trails, makeshift hideouts, and paths once worn smooth by the boots of Red Army soldiers. In the 1930s and 1940s, Ziwiling served as a natural fortress for the communist forces during the Yang'an period of the Chinese Revolution. After the Long March ended in 1935, Yang'an, just to the south of Ziwiling, became the de facto headquarters of the Communist Party. And Ziwiling, lying just beyond, became its strategic rearguard. This lush-cloaked wilderness, with its thick forests and twisting gullies, offered cover and concealment, ideal for guerrilla warfare, clandestine communications, and the training of new troops. Ancient footpaths were repurposed into logistical arteries, and hidden bunkers, cave dwellings, and outdoor classrooms were carved into the soft earth of the hillsides. Even today, some of these caves still exist. Weathered but intact, they peer from the hills like the openings of forgotten tombs. Some served as meeting places, others as rudimentary living quarters for party leaders and soldiers. There are stories of entire platoons disappearing into these earthy sanctuaries during enemy advances, their campfires muffled by trees, their presence revealed only by the faintest murmurs under the wind. But Ziwiling's role in history predates the 20th century. The region has long been associated with hidden resistance, folk rebellions, and the underground currents of peasant unrest. Its location, on the edge between the agriculturally rich Wei River Valley and the harsher expanses of the northern plateau, made it a natural boundary and buffer zone. Bandits, rebels, and wandering hermits have found refuge here for centuries. Some cave complexes show signs of Buddhist and Taoist inscriptions, suggesting their use as temples or spiritual retreats long before they became military shelters. Today, The mountain still bears this multi-layered identity: a revolutionary stronghold, a monastic retreat, and a quiet ecological sanctuary. The forests are dense and whisper with age. The climate here is cooler and wetter than the lowland plains of Shaanxi, creating a microclimate favorable to deciduous woodland, underbrush teeming with medicinal herbs, and streams that carry mineral-rich silt down into the valleys. Wild animals, foxes, badgers, and roe deer, move softly through the undergrowth, and a variety of bird species nest in the twisted boughs of pine and oak. In spring and summer, wildflowers pepper the hillsides, bursting briefly from between roots and loess folds. In the cooler months, mists drift through the upper ridges, clinging to the forest canopy and rendering the world into a grey-green watercolor. There's a stillness here, not empty, but heavy with memory. Though not widely developed for tourism, Ziwuling has begun to attract a quiet stream of hikers, history buffs, and pilgrims of the revolution, all seeking the places immortalized in old photographs and wartime dispatches. In places like the Ziwuling Revolutionary Memorial Forest, plaques commemorate key sites of Red Army encampments, and trails have been lightly marked to guide visitors along routes once walked by Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. Yet beyond these designated zones, the mountain quickly returns to its primeval quiet. The forest reclaims its space, and the old paths vanish into thickets. For those with the endurance and curiosity to press deeper, the rewards are immense: hidden glades, abandoned huts, and occasional stone markers etched with names long forgotten. Local villagers, few and far between, still tell stories of Red Army scouts arriving in the night, of strangers passing through with secret letters, of code words exchanged under the pine canopy. And this fusion of history and landscape, memory and mountain, is what makes Ziwuling so unreal. It is a place where time folds in on itself, where the rustle of trees might just be the sound of the past stirring. Unlike the dramatic cliffs of Zhangjiajie or the snowy summits of Baima, Ziwuling is a mountain of whispers, secrets, and buried chapters. It invites not awe, but contemplation, a slow unraveling of China's layered identity through loess and leaf, shadow, and silence. To stand atop one of its forested spines at dawn is to look out upon a landscape that has nourished revolution, shielded seekers, and absorbed the footsteps of generations. The morning light touches the golden loess and catches on dew-drenched leaves. The air is crisp, faintly scented with pine and memory, and if you listen carefully, perhaps, just perhaps, you'll hear the footfalls of the past, still moving through the undergrowth, still guiding the living through a land of legends. The journey into Mount Qiyunshan, or the 10,000 Great Hills, in Guangxi, is a descent into a dreamscape sculpted not by fantasy, but by nature's own peculiar persistence. The name isn't metaphorical. When one gazes across this undulating expanse of endless karst hills, the landscape genuinely resembles a green ocean frozen midwave, with countless limestone humps rising and falling like jade-colored swells under a sky of drifting clouds. Located in southwestern Guangxi, near the border with Vietnam, the Qiyunshan Range spreads across Fangcheng and the surrounding counties in a sweeping display of tropical karst geology. These hills are not monumental in height. Most peaks range between 500 to 1,000 meters, but their sheer density and repetition create a hypnotic effect that feels far more epic than any single summit ever could. The name 10,000 Hills is both poetic and astonishingly accurate. What makes the Qiyunshan landscape so unreal isn't just the scale, but the texture of the land. From above, the hills form a tessellated mosaic, interlocking as though arranged by an artist's hand. From the ground, the view transforms. Each hill is a lush tower, thick with subtropical vegetation. Bamboo groves, vine-draped forests, and palm-like cycads cloak the limestone forms, and orchids, ferns, and mosses thrive in the humid crevices. The landscape hums with life, a cradle of biodiversity, nurtured by the heavy seasonal rains and warm temperatures that define southern Guangxi. Rainfall here is abundant, and it plays a key role in shaping the region's geological character. The karst topography, formed through the dissolution of soluble limestone over millions of years, has created a terrain of sinkholes, underground rivers, and caves, some of which remain unexplored even today. Water seeps through cracks in the limestone, hollowing out the rock from within and sculpting mysterious subterranean chambers and complex aquifers. Rivers often vanish underground, only to re-emerge miles away in blue-green pools at the base of cliffs. One of the most extraordinary features of the Qiyunshan region is its relative lack of heavy tourism development, despite its staggering beauty. While places like Guilin or Yangshuo to the north are famous for their karst peaks, Qiyunshan remains a hidden realm, known mostly to locals, botanists, and intrepid photographers. This isolation has helped preserve its ecological integrity and cultural richness, allowing the land to breathe at its natural pace. The region is also home to a vibrant mosaic of ethnic communities, including the Zhuang, Yao, and Miao peoples, who have lived in harmony with the land for generations. Their villages nestle between the hills, connected by winding footpaths and wooden bridges that span narrow rivers and terraced fields. Traditional homes built from stone and timber perch on the lower slopes, with banana trees, papaya, and tea shrubs growing around their perimeters. Local life here moves slowly, in rhythm with the cycles of the land. In the early mornings, mist pools in the lowlands and rises among the hills like soft breath, casting the entire range into a state of liminal beauty, neither entirely of this world nor another. Farmers tend to rice paddies etched into the flatter valleys, while shepherds guide goats along rocky trails that weave between peaks. In the evenings, the setting sun spills gold over the hills, creating long shadows and fiery highlights that give the land a liquid glow, as if the hills are swelling and contracting in some gentle pulse. And still, deeper within Qiyunshan lie corners that are barely mapped. Hidden valleys harbor rare plant species that exist nowhere else on Earth, including medicinal herbs long used by the Yao people in traditional healing. Clouded leopards, macaques, and even civet cats have been spotted in the denser forested zones. Bird life is abundant: hornbills, eagles, paradise flycatchers, their cries echoing through the ravines and treetops like living music. The hills themselves are also vessels of myth. Local folklore tells of dragons curled within the mountains, their breath creating the fog, their backs forming the ridgelines. In one legend, a celestial painter spilled green ink from the heavens, and it congealed into these peaks. Another tale speaks of a giant turtle that carried 1,000 mountains on its back before collapsing in exhaustion, giving birth to Qiyunshan's endless undulations. Walking among these hills feels like stepping into those stories. The paths are quiet but speak in subtle ways, through the drip of water into ancient wells, the flutter of leaves in a windless glade, the hum of insects beneath mossy rocks. You feel observed by the hills, as though they are alive and ancient, holding secrets in their folds that time itself has forgotten. There are places in the world where nature displays its force, its height, its danger. Qiyunshan is none of these. It is not the realm of violent drama or volcanic fury. It is a realm of intimacy, of repetition so perfect it becomes transcendent. There is no single peak to conquer, no summit to claim victory over, only a rolling green silence, one that draws you in, slows your breath, and invites you to simply be. In a world growing ever louder, ever busier, ever more artificial, Mount Qiyunshan remains a place profoundly real in its quiet surrealism. It doesn't shout its wonders, it whispers them. And if you walk long enough, far enough, deep enough into its green maze, you might just begin to hear them too. There are places on this planet where nature's majesty and spiritual resonance converge so seamlessly that they seem to dissolve the line between the earthly and the celestial. Mount Qiyun, or Qiyunshan, in Anhui Province, is precisely such a place. Its name translates to Mount of the Cloud's Edge, and fittingly, this mountain seems not entirely of the earth, but perched on the very threshold of heaven. Here, the sky stoops low, veils of mist gather and depart like drifting silk, and every boulder and cliff bears not only the scars of time, but the ink of centuries, Taoist scripture carved into stone. Situated in southern Anhui, not far from the famed Huangshan, Mount Qiyun is one of the 4 sacred Taoist mountains of China, revered alongside Mount Wudang, Mount Longhu, and Mount Qingcheng. But where Huangshan roars with jagged peaks and tourist acclaim, Qiyun whispers. It is less about the climb and more about the presence, the stillness, the rhythm of breath in harmony with the mountain's ancient pulse. What makes Qiyunshan so utterly unreal is not its size. At a modest elevation of around 585 meters, it lacks the imposing height of the Himalayan or Sichuan ranges, but its spiritual density. The entire mountain is a scripture written in stone, air, and silence. Its cliffs are etched with more than 230 stone inscriptions, some dating back over 1,000 years, composed by poets, monks, emperors, and hermits, all drawn by the mountain's sublime energy. The ink-brushed characters, carved directly into the red sandstone, stand against sheer vertical faces and winding paths, offering verses of Taoist philosophy, poetry, and reflection. These are not simply decorations but echoes of meditations, each marking the passage of someone who came here seeking something beyond the tangible. Walking among them is like traversing a library without walls, where each inscription is a page, each cliffside a chapter in the long conversation between nature and spirit. And then there is the Cloud Sea, the famed Yunhai for which the mountain is named. On most mornings, especially after rainfall or in cooler seasons, the mountain becomes a floating island in an endless, undulating ocean of clouds. The phenomenon is most intense around the Qiyunshan, or Heavenly Bridge, a natural rock ledge where visitors can look out and find themselves suspended between sky and earth, standing seemingly on nothing. The mists curl and drift, sometimes parting to reveal distant peaks or sunlit villages far below, before swallowing everything again in a soft, silver hush. But Qiyunshan is not only revered for its atmosphere, it is a living religious sanctuary. The mountain is home to numerous Taoist temples, pavilions, and meditation sites, many of them nestled into the cliffs or hidden in forested groves. The Zhenxian Temple, built during the Ming dynasty, is the most significant of these, and remains an active place of worship. Within its courtyards, incense coils burn slowly, their smoke rising to join the clouds, while monks tend to ancient rituals that remain unchanged in form since dynastic times. The mountain is closely associated with Laozi, the legendary founder of Taoism, and many believe that he once traveled or meditated here. In Taoist cosmology, Mount Qiyun is seen as a sacred point where heaven and earth communicate, a place where the veil between realms is thinner, and one's internal balance can be restored through contemplation and nature. The natural features of the mountain only enhance its otherworldliness. The landscape is a tapestry of crimson rock, moss-laden steppes, twisting pine trees, and stone bridges arching over ravines. One of the most iconic symbols of Qiyunshan is the Red Cloud Cliff, a vast rock wall the color of ancient blood where inscriptions glint under filtered sunlight. Rainwater flows gently down moss-darkened channels, and the quiet gurgle of springs fills the hollows between temples. But it is in the sounds, or lack thereof, that the mountain's enchantment becomes absolute. The hush here is different. It is not silence born of absence, but one born of presence. The occasional chirp of a magpie, the distant ring of a temple bell, the soft footfall of cloth shoes on stone, all feel amplified within the vast, watching calm of the mountain. It's a place where even breath feels sacred, and every step is part of a ritual, even if you don't know the rite. During festivals such as the Taoist Lantern Festival or the birthday of Laozi, the mountain awakens with pilgrims and worshippers, their red and yellow robes flickering among the mist like living flames. Lanterns are strung from pine branches and temple gates, and the mountain flickers between sacred calm and celebratory color. Prayers are chanted, bells echo across the valleys, and monks offer readings from ancient Taoist texts, all amidst the ever-changing dance of clouds and sky. One of the lesser-known but deeply moving aspects of Qiyunshan is the network of hermit caves, many still occupied by modern-day ascetics and recluses. These individuals live in near seclusion, meditating, growing herbs, and sustaining ancient ways of spiritual practice. Occasionally, you might see one of them pass by silently, carrying a basket of leaves or water, barely acknowledging your presence. A reminder that in some corners of the world, the ancient path is still walked, quietly and steadfastly. Perhaps the most unreal thing about Mount Qiyun is the way it rearranges your sense of reality. Here, time becomes fluid. A step taken today feels tethered to a step taken 1,000 years ago by someone chasing the same questions about life, purpose, harmony, and the movement of the Tao. The modern world fades quickly as one ascends its ridges. Phones lose signal, clocks lose relevance, and only the rhythm of walking and breathing remains. If you come seeking spectacle, Qiyunshan offers subtlety instead. If you expect conquest, it offers humility. It is not a mountain to be scaled and left behind, but one to be absorbed by, slowly, reverently. It teaches not through thunder or grandeur, but through clouds parting at the right moment, or a lone inscription catching the last light of day. To leave Qiyunshan is to carry its stillness with you, not as a memory, but as a shift in perspective. A part of you remains there, somewhere beneath the pines or beside the carved verse on a red cliff. And in some subtle, unspoken way, you are changed, not by what you saw, but by what you felt within the mist and silence of the cloud's edge. High in the ethereal reaches of the Tibetan plateau, where the sky stretches endlessly and the wind sings across vast, treeless expanses, stands Mount Longzhu, or Dragon Head Mountain. This is no ordinary peak. Its form, which seems to emerge from the plateau like the craggy brow of a sleeping behemoth, gives it its name. To local nomads, it is not just a mountain but a living entity, sacred, watching, breathing. Its ridges resemble the spiny crest of a coiled dragon gazing toward the heavens, and its presence dominates the surrounding alpine grasslands like a sentinel of myth, eternally silent yet profoundly alive. Located in a remote part of Tibet, where roads become suggestions and directions are often given in reference to prayer flags or yak herding trails, Mount Longzhou sits far from the circuits of mass tourism. Its relative obscurity in global travel literature is not a reflection of its insignificance, but a consequence of its sacredness and inaccessibility. Here, one does not simply visit the mountain. One approaches it, slowly, respectfully, and always with a degree of spiritual readiness. To the nomadic Drokpa herders who have wandered these highlands for generations, Longzhou is known by names whispered around firelit tents and offered up in chanting rituals before seasonal migrations. The mountain is part of their cosmology, a divine landmark marking the border between the physical and the spiritual world. They believe that the dragon spirit of the mountain guards the balance of life in the high pastures. When storms roll in, it is the dragon thrashing its tail. When skies clear and sunlight streams down in radiant shafts, it is the dragon breathing peace. Despite its remote location, Longzhou has a powerful spiritual pull. Pilgrimages are made here not en masse, but individually or in small familial groups. Herders may walk for days across treacherous terrain to reach its base, bearing bundles of juniper twigs, strings of prayer flags, and tsampa cakes to leave as offerings. The summit itself is rarely climbed, not out of fear, but reverence. To walk upon the dragon's head is considered taboo by many, unless one has received divine dreams or visions calling them to ascend. Instead, the Kora, or circumambulation path, around Mount Longzhou is the most sacred journey. This circuit winds through windswept grasslands, across small glacial-fed streams, and past ancient stone cairns covered in layers of colorful flags fluttering furiously in the ever-present mountain wind. Pilgrims chant mantras as they walk, their fingers moving over beads, their eyes often wet with tears as they round a bend and see the peak glowing under the sun or shrouded in storm clouds. The flora and fauna surrounding Longzhou are as unique as its spiritual aura. These highland grasslands are among the most untouched ecosystems on Earth. Wild Tibetan arses, Qiang, gallop in the distance, while black-necked cranes, considered spiritual messengers in local beliefs, glide over alpine lakes nearby. Snow leopards, rarely seen but always revered, are said to pass through these territories under moonlight, moving like spirits across the snow-dusted ridges. Edelweiss, blue poppies, and alpine asters bloom in brief, brilliant defiance during the short summer, carpeting the meadows in surreal hues just beneath the dragon's shadow. The weather here is unforgiving and elemental. Blizzards can descend without warning, and even in midsummer, nights bring biting cold and vast constellations so bright and close they feel like a roof of burning stones above your head. There are few places on Earth where the Milky Way feels so tangible, where the silence is so complete, and where the air itself seems imbued with centuries of prayer. There are small stone shrines dotted around the base of Longzhou, often built by hand from local rocks by nomads passing through. These may house simple lungta flags, white scarves known as kata, or even hand-carved mani stones inscribed with prayers to Shenrezig, Tara, and other deities of the Tibetan Buddhist pantheon. Interestingly, some of these shrines also bear signs of Bon traditions, predating Buddhism, evidence that Mount Longzhou's spiritual relevance goes back far beyond written memory. Oral legends say that the mountain was once the seat of a sky god who tamed the chaos of the winds and tethers the clouds to the peaks to ensure water reaches the herders' pastures. Locals believe the mountain holds omens and portents. If the cloud cover clings tightly to the peak for days, it may signify an illness or misfortune coming to a nearby tribe. If the summit is visible and illuminated at dawn, it is seen as a good year for livestock and new births. Dreams involving the Dragon of Longzhou are treated with great seriousness, and shamans are consulted to interpret their meanings. Sometimes, those with dreams are guided to spend weeks in silent retreat near the mountain, listening to wind, birdsong, and inner stillness until answers are revealed. Despite its remoteness, Longzhou has started to draw the quiet attention of a few spiritual seekers and ecologists. Small academic groups have visited the peripheries, studying the glacial runoff patterns, the pristine alpine biodiversity, and the socio-spiritual practices of the Drokpa. These studies are done with the utmost care, often involving local lamas or elders to ensure the mountain's sanctity is not disrupted. What's most unreal about Mount Longzhou is how deeply it transforms those who come into its orbit. It's not the climb, or the view, or even the legend. It's the atmosphere, the intangible but undeniable weight of sacred presence. Many who have walked around it report strange dreams, emotional purging, or a profound sense of interconnectedness with the land. Some speak of a dragon breath moment, when a sudden warm breeze cuts through the cold, wrapping around the pilgrim's body like a benediction, vanishing as quickly as it came. In a world that often equates wonder with spectacle and noise, Mount Longzhou teaches a different kind of awe. It is a silent teacher. It instructs not through grandeur, but through stillness. Not through monuments, but through the contour of stone worn smooth by wind, the whisper of a crane's wings, or the moment a yak caravan crests a hill, framed perfectly against the sky like a painting come to life. To see Mount Longzhou is to understand why certain places are not just sacred, but alive, not just locations, but entities that listen, remember, and sometimes, if you are very quiet, speak. A destination, it offers a threshold. Climbing Mount Qiyunshan is not for the casual visitor. The ascents are difficult, the terrain is often loose and jagged, and the climate changes without warning. Yet those who persist are rewarded with a sense of entering a space outside of time. The views from its summit ridges, particularly on the rare days when clouds gather, are surreal. The golden hues of the desert below merge with distant mountain ranges that appear as layered silhouettes in the haze. In spring, though brief, some desert wildflowers bloom unexpectedly in the crevices of rock, small splashes of crimson and violet in an otherwise amber world. One of the most sacred locations on Qiyunshan is a place known locally as the Window of Silence. This is a high natural arch carved into a sheer cliff, facing east. It frames the sunrise every morning during the equinox, casting a shaft of light directly into a small prayer chamber carved into the rock just opposite. The effect, whether engineered or a gift of nature, is striking. Pilgrims come here and sit for hours, watching the light creep across the stone floor, illuminating ancient etchings and small statues of seated bodhisattvas. It is believed that during this moment, the boundary between the earthly and the divine thins, and some whisper that wishes made here carry straight to heaven. Access to Qiyunshan remains deliberately limited. There are no major roads that lead directly to it. The nearest village is nearly a day's hike away, and even that is a collection of a few mud brick homes and livestock pens. The locals are used to the mountain and speak of it with the sort of reverence one gives a living elder. They say the mountain has moods. There are days when it hums, when the wind echoes in such a way that it resembles chanting. There are days when birds will not fly near its slopes, as if something unseen has stirred beneath the stone. Geologically, Qiyunshan is part of the northern tail of the Qiyunshan mountain system, though it sits isolated from the main chains. It's composed primarily of ancient sedimentary rock uplifted by tectonic activity, interspersed with igneous formations that account for some of its more dramatic cliffs and overhangs. Over time, the relentless forces of erosion have shaped the mountain into a spectacular series of natural amphitheaters, vertical gullies, and spiked ridgelines. The interplay between erosion and mineral composition is likely what gives the mountain its characteristic golden hue, especially at dawn and dusk. In terms of biodiversity, Mount Qiyunshan's ecosystem is sparse but not empty. While most of the surrounding land supports little more than desert grasses and drought-resistant shrubs, the higher elevations, especially the northern shaded faces, harbor small groves of ancient juniper and scrub pine, some gnarled into surreal, wind-warped forms. In these rare oases, one might catch a glimpse of blue sheep, steppe eagles, or even the elusive snow leopard, which is known to range across these high deserts from the nearby Qiyunshan and Altun Mountains ranges. These sightings are extremely rare and often considered spirit-blessed events by the few who inhabit the region. The religious influence of Mount Qiyunshan continues today, albeit quietly. Each year, during the 6th lunar month, a small, largely unadvertised pilgrimage takes place. Dozens of devotees, mostly elderly men and women from surrounding provinces, journey on foot, bringing offerings of butter lamps, incense, and sacred grains. They perform full-body prostrations as they ascend, some taking hours to complete only a few hundred meters. It is not spectacle, it is silent devotion. There are no banners, no tour groups, no festival markets. Just the quiet shuffle of slippers on sand and the rhythmic thud of hands and knees against stone. For documentary filmmakers, adventurers, and seekers alike, Qiyunshan is a rare gem that has escaped the commodification of sacred places. There is no ticket booth here, no drone footage, or souvenir stalls. The mountain resists commodification by its very nature. Its remoteness is its sanctuary. It demands patience, effort, and respect, and in return, it reveals something indescribable, a feeling of having touched something vast, quiet, and eternal. It's this sensation, more than any photograph or travelogue, that stays with those who leave the mountain. That perhaps is Qiyunshan's greatest mystery and gift, that even in its harshness and solitude, it becomes a mirror for something deeply human. In its silence, we find our own. In its immensity, our humility. And in its golden slopes, still touched by light after all these centuries, a timeless reminder that not all wonders are loud or obvious. Some simply wait for the right soul to notice them. Mount Galagong's west slope, nestled in the shadowy borderlands of western Yunnan where China meets Myanmar, is one of the most biologically intense regions on the planet. A realm where geology, climate, and ancient isolation have fused into a sanctuary unlike any other. Here, the land folds and climbs in dramatic silence, dense with mist, saturated with rainfall, and cloaked in primeval cloud forests that drip with epiphytes and tremble with the movements of unseen life. Unlike the more trafficked eastern faces of the Galagong Range, the western slope is a secluded dreamland, less touched by human encroachment, less mapped, and far more feral. It's a place where narrow moss-slicked ridges drop into gorgeously tangled valleys, where the sound of cascading mountain rivers and unseen animal calls create a continuous ambient music that never stops. The terrain itself seems alive, an overlapping labyrinth of ferns, vines, orchids, fungi, and colossal trees wrapped in moss so thick it feels like walking through living velvet. The Galagong Range, and especially its western flank, is often referred to by scientists as a biogeographic boundary line. It is the dividing edge between the flora and fauna of the Himalayan ecosystem to the west and the Southeast Asian tropics to the east. This makes the western slope a biodiversity corridor, a place where species from vastly different biomes have collided, mingled, adapted, and evolved in wild and unpredictable ways. The result is a biological tapestry with an almost mythical density of life. Within these wet, green heights, cloud forests dominate. These forests sit like suspended worlds between 2,000 and 3,000 meters in elevation, constantly bathed in moisture from orographic clouds, low-hanging vapor created when warm air from the plains below is pushed upward by the mountain's steep ridges. These conditions nurture one of the highest densities of bryophytes, lichens, and mosses anywhere in the world. Towering rhododendron trees bloom with massive clusters of red and violet flowers, while ancient tree ferns, some over 10 meters tall, evoke the feeling of entering a lost Jurassic world. In this isolated environment, evolution has run wild. The Galagong West Slope is home to hundreds of endemic species, including birds, insects, plants, and mammals that exist nowhere else on Earth. Some, like the red panda, find refuge in the higher forest reaches, while clouded leopards silently roam the lower tree lines. Unseen by most eyes are the region's amphibians and reptiles. Dozens of newly described or yet undescribed salamanders, frogs, and geckos thrive in the forest floor's wet litter and rocky pools. One of the most iconic species tied to the Galagong region is the black snub-nosed monkey, Rhinopithecus beati, one of the world's rarest and most endangered primates. Although their densest populations lie deeper into the central ridges of the range, sightings along the west slope have been recorded, particularly where mixed coniferous and broadleaf forests blend. These ghost-like primates, with their human-like eyes and almost porcelain faces, move in tight family groups, their long, thick fur allowing them to survive the cold, misty heights. Perhaps the most striking thing about the western slope is how it almost seems designed to remain hidden. Even today, many areas remain inaccessible except on foot, and only during certain seasons. The trails that exist are remnants of old salt trade routes and tea-horse paths once used by local ethnic communities, the Lisu, Nu, and Durung peoples, who have lived in and around these forests for centuries, cultivating a lifestyle intertwined with the rhythms of the mountain. Their villages are often tucked away into natural clearings, perched along ridges where sunlight can pierce the fog. Life here is subsistence-based and deeply traditional. Roofs are made of bark or stone, foods are foraged, hunted, or grown on precarious terraces, and spiritual practices honor the forest as an animate presence, a protector, provider, and punisher. The western slope is not just a geographical location for them, it's a living entity, sacred and watchful. Rivers cut dramatically through this landscape. The Nujiang, Salween River, one of Asia's great arteries, roars beneath the western faces of the Galagong Range, creating deep valleys and chasms. It's fed by hundreds of crystal-clear tributaries, many of which originate as glacial melt or underground springs high in the range. These streams are home to rare fish, crustaceans, and aquatic plants, and provide water to thousands of species as they wind their way through gorges and ravines that have barely been explored. Geologically, the western slope of Galagong is an expression of immense tectonic collision. It was thrust upward over millions of years as the Indian plate rammed into the Eurasian plate, giving birth not only to the Himalayas but also to the complex vertical terrain of the Galagong Range. The rock composition here is diverse, with slate, schist, gneiss, and even bands of marble peeking through the forest in polished outcrops, especially near rivers and cliff walls. Some of these formations host rare caves and hidden waterfalls, echoing chambers that very few humans have ever entered. Despite its incredible richness, the western slope is also fragile. While it is protected under the broader Qiyunshan National Nature Reserve, pressures from logging, mining, and infrastructure projects persist at its margins. Fortunately, the sheer steepness of the terrain and its difficult access have kept most of the core areas intact. Conservation efforts are ongoing, with biologists and local communities working together to catalogue and preserve this treasure trove of life before more species vanish unseen. To visit the western slope of Mount Galagong is to leave behind the modern world entirely. There are no cities, no cell towers, and no marked trails in many parts. What awaits instead is a cathedral of mist and moss, of ancient trees and wild rivers, where evolution still dances unchecked and where the world's oldest rhythms hum quietly beneath the leaves. And in the stillness, amidst the orchids and bird calls and ferns older than civilization, one begins to understand why this mountain is more than just a mountain. It is a cradle of life, an emerald continent hidden within the sky, whispering the secrets of eons past and beckoning the rare soul who dares to listen. The southern cliffs of Mount Taihang, located in the province of Henan, stand as a towering testament to the Earth's slow and relentless artistry. Sheer vertical walls of rose-colored sandstone, cleaved by time and tectonics into an array of dizzying precipices, hanging valleys, and plunging canyons. Rising from the transition zone between China's central plains and the rugged Lurs Plateau, this southern reach of the Taihang mountain range is perhaps its most visually dramatic and culturally potent, a place where natural spectacle and human history have carved parallel paths along the same vertical walls. From a distance, the cliffs resemble a series of gigantic fortresses, each wall stacked with red and ochre striations that chronicle hundreds of millions of years of geological formation. These sandstone and conglomerate formations are not only vertically imposing but also astonishingly uniform in height, as if they had been sculpted by colossal chisels. In the golden light of early morning or sunset, the entire escarpment glows like fire, flaming orange at the top, shading into deep purples where crevices and gorges plunge out of sight. But it is not just the color or the verticality that makes these cliffs unreal. It is the fact that people once lived, traveled, and built into them. Ancient villagers, pressed by isolation and necessity, carved plank paths, cliffside stairways, and stone tunnels directly into the faces of these cliffs. The most famous among them is the Guoliang Tunnel Road, a staggering feat of determination and manual labor. Constructed in the 1970s by a handful of villagers using only chisels, hammers, and their bare hands, the Guoliang Tunnel punches through the vertical wall of the Taihang Cliffs with a winding, narrow road wide enough for a single vehicle. Through open windows chiseled into the cliffside, the abyss yawns just inches away. Walking along the old plank paths, some mere slats of wood attached to iron bolts hammered into vertical stone, you feel suspended between heaven and earth. These paths were once lifelines, connecting remote cliffside hamlets with the valleys below. Some of them remain in use, and others have been converted into tourist walkways, fitted with glass-bottomed platforms that deliver heart-stopping views down hundreds of meters of empty air to the forested gorges below. Water is a constant presence along the southern cliffs. Ribbons of waterfalls cascade from hidden springs and clefts high in the mountains, their misty spray catching the sun like floating jewels. The most famous of these is Taihang Grand Canyon Waterfall, which plunges dramatically down the vertical stone, framed by moss and ferns. These waterfalls are born from subterranean aquifers that thread through the porous sandstone, and they are nourished year-round by the plateau's rains and snowmelt. Below the cliffs, narrow valleys wind like green arteries, each one a microcosm of biodiversity. Because of the elevation and the enclosure provided by the cliff walls, these valleys host a range of microclimates, allowing both northern deciduous species and subtropical plants to thrive in close proximity. The result is a lush, forested basin, alive with Chinese yews, walnut trees, wild persimmons, flowering rhododendrons, and herbs used in traditional medicine. These valleys are also home to animals like the macaque monkey, muntjac deer, and a wide variety of birds, including peregrine falcons that nest in the cliff recesses. The cultural history of the region runs just as deep as the gorges themselves. The Taihang Mountains have long been viewed as a natural boundary between the North China Plain and the interior heartlands, and the southern cliffs have served as strategic refuges throughout Chinese history. During times of war, rebels, monks, hermits, and soldiers have taken shelter in the caves and gullies hidden in these walls. Legends speak of Daoist sages who built cliffside shrines and disappeared into the mist, their temples now no more than weathered stone niches obscured by lichen. One of the oldest surviving structures in this region is the Red Cliff Temple, a tiny shrine built onto a narrow ledge, accessible only by ascending a nearly vertical path of 800 stone steps. Inside, aged incense curls into the dim air while the wind whistles through the cracks in the cliff, reminding every visitor of the height and the hollowness beneath. This is a place where the sacred feels tethered to the sky. In more recent history, during the 20th century, the cliffs were home to anti-Japanese guerrilla units and Red Army resistance cells. The terrain's inaccessibility made it a natural defensive stronghold, and many of the cave systems were used as hideouts and hospitals. Even now, local villagers tell stories of hidden caches, long-lost escape routes, and ancient trails known only to elders. Today, the southern cliffs are slowly gaining recognition among domestic explorers and landscape photographers, but they remain vastly undervisited compared to more commercialized sites like Zhangjiajie. This has preserved much of their raw beauty, allowing rare mosses, orchids, and even medicinal fungi to grow undisturbed on their vertical surfaces. The mystique of Mount Taihang's southern edge lies in this intersection of the impossible, where vertical rock becomes a corridor, where humans carve through stone and live alongside it, and where the natural and sacred blur into one. It is not just a destination but a dimension, a place where the earth stands naked and proud, where waterfalls drop like silk ribbons from the clouds, and where footsteps echo in tunnels cut by hands that dared to reshape the unshapable. Standing at the edge of one of these cliffs, the wind rushing past like time itself, the scale of it all is overwhelming, not just the height, but the accumulated layers of geology, history, culture, and struggle. Here, one feels not only dwarfed by nature but threaded into it, stitched by silence into the fabric of the mountain. This video is for educational or entertainment purposes only, and information provided in the video may be incorrect. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel and like the video.